Okay, I'm going to call the special meeting of the Board of Aldermen to order on Monday, November 15th, 2021 at 8:12 p.m. in the Aldermanic Chamber and via Zoom teleconference, which meeting link can be found on the agenda and on the city's website calendar. The prayer will be offered by Deputy Clerk Allison Waite, and Alderman Lopez will lead us in the pledge to the flag.
Almighty God, we have the high honor and the serious duty to manage the affairs of our beloved city. Fill us, O God, with a spirit of unity and understanding, which enables us to face our multiple problems with a serene mind, with justice and charity for all, so that any and all decisions made by us will always be for the betterment and greater happiness of all our fellow citizens. So help us God. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. If you're participating via Zoom, please state your presence, reason for not attending the meeting in person, and whether there is anyone else in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the Right to Know law. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman O'Brien.
Present.
Alderman Clee.
Here.
Alderwoman Kelly. Alderman Dowd.
Present.
Alderman Karen.
Here.
Alderman Clemens.
Here.
Alderman Lopez.
Here.
Alderman Tenza. Alderwoman Liu.
Here.
Alderman Jetty.
Here.
Alderman Schmidt. Alderman Laws. Alderman Cleaver. Alderman Harriet Gathright.
Present.
And Alderman Wilshire.
I'm here.
All right, you have 10 in attendance.
Thank you. Communications.
Okay.
From Kimberly Kleiner, Administrative Services Director, regarding an update on the 2022 revaluation.
There being no objection, I'll accept the communication and place it on file. Discussion. Tonight we are having a discussion on the assessing update on the revaluation. I will recognize Administrative Services Director Kim Kleiner as well as Chief Assessor Rick Vincent. Director Kleiner.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. So we have a brief presentation. We also have members from Vision Government Solutions who are attending via Zoom. And they will also be speaking this evening, as well as Chief Assessor Vincent, who many of you may not have had the pleasure of meeting, but I assure you the city is very lucky to have. He said this morning to me that it was 11 months, and I can't believe it's been 11 months already, but I am very proud and very glad that he came to join the city. So I'm going to share a brief presentation and we'll get started. So the 2022 full measure and list from revaluation, in accordance with New Hampshire statutes, the city of Nashua is conducting this, and we estimated it would take about 3 years to complete, finalizing in September of 2022. The process actually started back in August in 2019. I know with COVID in there, that seems like a million light years ago. But we did start with a request for proposals, which actually brought 4 proposals forward. And just to give you a brief timeline of what happened, in August, we did that request. A city committee was formed, and the Board of Assessors ultimately chose a recommendation to make to the Board of Aldermen. In February 19 of 2020, the Finance Committee approved the contract And in February 28th, we issued our data collection press release. And March 2nd, the Vision Government Solutions came in for a startup meeting up in the city auditorium. Many of you are present, with the New Hampshire Department of Revenue. And that really kicked off the process. Shortly after that, in the next few days, they started data collection. And then we all remember what happened after that, COVID. So it was important to keep the process going. March 16th of 2020, there was an amendment to the contract due to COVID. Interior inspections were suspended, but the exterior measure and list continued. And this was an accepted practice by the New Hampshire Department of Revenue. In June 28th of 2020, we began quarterly updates to the Board of Tax and Land Appeals. Now, this is important to remember that this is a ordered reassessment by the Board of Tax and Land Appeals. So not only does the Chief Assessor report quarterly to them, but he also does a number of quarterly updates to the Board of Assessors with Vision. And I will pass it to your Chief Assessor.
Thank you, Lynn. Good evening. The next slide in the presentation is a screen capture. Actually, the next two slides are screen captures from the Assessing Department's page on the city website. The quarterly reports that Ms. Kleiner mentioned are provided on this webpage. We have quarterly reports that go to the BTLA, the Board of Tax and Land Appeals. We also have quarterly reports to the Board of Assessors. Those aren't on this page, but we do have bi-weekly status reports that we receive from Vision Technologies. Those are also shown here on the screen capture. Those are on the assessing webpage as well. Mike Torello, June Perry, and Steve Whalen from Vision Technologies are here, or I'm sorry, Vision Government Solutions are here. They will speak to the next several slides regarding the revaluation process. When they're done, I will speak to a report that I did back in September that was a study of 2021 market trends. When Steve is done, when Mike Torello is done with the revaluation process, he will also present two reports from recent revaluations they did in Manchester and Salem. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike Torello.
Thank you, Richard. I'm Mike Torello, Vice President of Appraisal Operations for Vision Government Solutions. I also have with me June Perry and Steve Whalen. They're also district managers. He concentrates on the commercials. June is running the project and works directly with the residentials. So I just want to give you a few minutes of a little breakdown of the process that we're doing for the revaluation. So it is broken up into 5 sections that you see on the screen. The data collection portion, physical data of the inspections that we've been doing for the last 2 years. The gathering of market information that we'll talk about in a moment. Sales, cost information, land sales, income and expense information. Then we gather all that information and we do a valuation process with the 3 approaches to value to determine the market value of the property. Then we'll complete a peer review, which is a quality control check for equitable and fair values and checking the physical data one more time. And then finally, we'll do an informal hearing process where we meet with the taxpayers to explain the process that we did and answer questions. Next slide. So the data collection, which we did start in the winter of 2020, this portion is now starting to come to completion with the physical inspection part that we've done, measuring, looking at story heights, styles, walking the site, taking photos, gathering all the pertinent information that we use for evaluation. We have done approximately 98% of the inspections, which is wrapping up now for the residential, and we've done 97% for the commercials. We are now in the phase of doing interior inspections, which we were halted in doing earlier. Now we are sending letters out to each ward, wrapping up Ward 2 and starting Ward 3, to send out letters for setting up appointments so we can do the interior inspections. So this will be wrapping up in the next few months with the final interior inspection. Next slide, please. So once this is complete, we start to gather information. And actually, we've already started doing some of this market analysis in this process of inspecting the sales that have occurred. So we do this review of the sales. We'll be sending out income and expense information to the commercials in the January period. Gather more information. We'll be collecting market information on construction costs and other pertinent information that we use, surveys, and so forth, in the market, capitalization rates. We gather all this information so that we can then begin to set the land values and neighborhood adjustments, and to prepare all the data so that we can do the three approaches to that. Next slide. So these three approaches, which are recognized by the IAAO standards that we use, the cost approach, which is looking at land values and then construction costs, less depreciation as a method of value. The income approach, which pertains more to apartments, mixed use, commercial and industrial properties, is looking at the income stream and then capitalizing that value to that stream into a value. And then the sales comparison approach is looking at common sales that occur with similar comparison to non-sales and determining a value for, usually mostly for the residential, and we also look at the sales for the other classes. During this phase, we will analyze everything that we've done in the earlier phases and put all this data together and come up with market values for the land and buildings in total value for all the properties. So once we've set these values and rates and through the analysis of all the market data, we will be working closely with the assessor's office on this information and make sure that they approve every step and phase that we do, just like we've done with the data collection phase. Once this is completed, we'll start to do a peer review, which is a drive-by check and review of all the neighborhoods and properties, also commercial properties, and looking at the data that was collected, determining the accuracy of it, and then making sure that the values that have been preliminarily set are reviewed for accuracy, uniformity, and to be equitable for all different groups of properties. We'll be looking at style of properties, neighborhood delineations. We'll be looking at other variables as we do the review from the valuation. The valuation looks at properties based on their age, based on other variables, to make sure lot size and so forth, and value of the land, to make sure that everything is done fairly. Next slide. So once this is completed and the properties are been valued and reviewed and approved by the assessors for the preliminary values, we'll be sending out valuation notices to all the people in the community so that they'll have an opportunity to do an informal hearing with our staff to go over the values, to go over the data, to answer any of their questions, we encourage them to bring information that can help support any claims they have, or just to, enforce that we did a good job and to check things. So during this whole process, it's informal. We work with the taxpayers to explain the information and make sure that we get the information and the values accurate. Again, we feel that the taxpayers are part of the valuation process, and we can bring a lot of added information. So once this is finalized, we'll send a notice out if there was a change in their property, or if there wasn't a change, if they went to a hearing. And sometimes when we make changes, there might be people that did not come in for a hearing that might have an adjustment also. If we were looking at, say, a condo complex or a neighborhood, we find that an adjustment needs to be done. And then, once this is complete, the taxpayer has the ability to file further appeals, if necessary, with the assessor.
Excuse me? Could we ask him to speak louder?
Sure. Mr. Torello, could you speak a little louder?
Sure.
Thank you
Is this-
so much, appreciate it.
Okay, so that's basically the process that we do for the revaluation. Next slide.
Did you get him on fire?
Okay, thank you, Mike.
Sure.
All right, so the next presentation is the report of real estate market trends. This is the report that I had mentioned earlier. This is a report that I did back in September of this year. I looked at sales from October 1st of 2020 to July 7th of 2021. That was one report that I ran. The other report was from April 1st of 2021 to July 7th. So I included all the valid sales in those two time periods. What I found was on the, we'll go to the next slide, on the second page of this report, I compared my findings, and I broke the findings down into several categories. The first category, the first row, is all sales. That's every type of sale that was in the study. That's residential properties, commercial properties, vacant land, industrial properties. So what I found was in the October 1 study, the study that started on October 1st of 2020, from that time period, October 1 to July 7th, found the mean ratio. I'll back up and explain a little bit how we come up with these ratios. So the last revaluation was in 2018. The valuation date is April 1st. So the last revaluation that we did was April 1st of 2018. That reflects the values as of that date. What happens in the meantime is the market values can change. And they can go up, they can go down, they can stay stable. So what we do is we look at the sale prices that occur after that date and compare the sale prices to the assessed values. Once we set that April 2018 value for assessment purposes, we hold that value at 2018, at the 2018 rates. In the meantime, as I said, the market is fluctuating. So we want to compare so what I'm doing in these reports is I'm comparing the sales that occurred after October 1st of 2020 to the 2018 assessments. And that's what the ratio is. So on this first ratio, it's 77%. That's the mean ratio for October 1st, 2020. That tells us that the assessments are 77% of market value. So the property values have increased roughly 23% since April of 2018. Now compare that to the April 2021 study, and that ratio was 72%, so it's a 5% change. That's telling us that property values went up between the two studies. There was an increase in the values of 5%. That's just in that 6-month time period, essentially. Then you can follow those ratios down, so I have mean ratios and median ratios. Then I broke it down below the all sales row. I have all commercial industrial sales. That's a ratio of 93% for October 1, and then April 1 is a ratio of 90%. That's telling us that the commercial industrial sales are 90 to 93% of market value. And you can follow those down. I won't go through every one of them, but I break them down between residential sales, then break those further down into residential condos with land, condos without land, manufactured housing, single-family homes, and two-family homes. So most of the residential ratios are in the 70s, between 71 to 76% for the October 1 study. One exception is the manufactured housing. The median ratio is 58%. And that's common with manufactured housing because the sale prices are so low that any small, or relatively low, so any small fluctuation in those values can affect the ratios in a larger amount. But you'll also see on the manufactured housing that the mean ratio between October 2020 and April 2021 went from 70% to 59%. That's a large increase in manufactured housing values. One exception that you'll see in this report is the office building sales. That was 1.18%, 118%, and that's those are the same between the October and the April reports. That's because it was the same 5 sales, so I didn't have any additional sales in the later report. So what that's showing is that the residential values are increasing faster than commercial and industrial sales. And on the third column here, the change, that's the change between the October and the April values. That's not from 2018 to 2021. That's just from October to April. So you'll see going down the columns, you'll have 5% change, 3% change. Most of them are right around 8%. Again, the manufacturing housing changed 11%. So that was the largest change in all of the different classes. So that's telling us that roughly, if you project that out for an annual increase, it's right around 10 to 15% generally. I'll turn it back over to Mike Torello, and he'll present a couple of reports that Vision has provided.
Excuse me? Are we going to wait till the end for questions, or could we
Yes,
ask
I'm
questions
sorry.
as we go along?
You prefer as we go? Okay, you can.
Thank you. May I, I just wondered why did you find it, I'm not sure what's useful about looking at the 3 months, looking more specifically at that 3 months. Just curious, because
Yep.
you've got it kind of embedded in the first column anyway, right? Because that goes through July 7th of 21, but then you took a smaller
took a smaller sample, which was more reflective of current values at that time.
So did you do it so that you could more easily extrapolate what it might be per year, annualize it? Because you just sort of suggested what it meant as an annualized figure.
Well, yes, and I wanted to see where values were as of between April 1st of 2021 and July 2021.
Okay.
So it really gives us a good snapshot of where our assessments are at that time in relation to current market values. The market has been really hot, and so I wanted to see the property values have been increasing rapidly, and I think most people know that. So I wanted to see where our values were at the present time.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Mike?
Okay. Do you want to put up the other document, Kim, for the, you can start with the Manchester? Thank you. So we just wanted to go over and explain a couple projects that we've just finished. Manchester, New Hampshire and Salem, New Hampshire, which are other kind of sister cities of Nashua, and what they went through during their revaluation, which was just completed for this year, 4/1/2021. Somewhat similar to some of the patterns that Richard was talking about for the percent changes. If you look middle, lower end, Manchester as a whole increased 40% from the last revaluation of 5 years ago. The single families were up 46%. The condos were up 52%. So the 2 families and 3 families were up a very large number, 64 and 61. As for the apartments, also 57. Vacant land went up about average. And as similar to the pattern that's happening in Nashua so far, the commercials did go up less at 14%. Industrials went up a little bit more at 21%. And then you can see the different styles of homes, ranches, split levels, bungalows, colonials, capes, so forth. They pretty much all range, except for the modern contemporaries, which there are not a lot of them in the city, in the 40 to mid-40 range, some 50 or higher. There definitely are certain properties that are more desirable and certain locations that are more desirable. But you can see that there were large increases over the 5-year period. And just to further a few other categories, the mixed use, which is a combination of residential and commercial type property, went up somewhere in between 2 at 22. The mobile homes went up 40%, and the 4 to 8 unit families went up actually 76%. The multifamilies are a very large demand. I think a lot of this is that been going up for many years in the Boston area, Massachusetts area, and I think they've saturated. There are better deals coming up north, and now people are purchasing it, and it's really increasing at a high rate. And then you can see from the sales that we brought the properties in at 100%, almost 2,000 sales that we had. We looked over a period from 4/1/2020 to a few months after 4/1/2021, so we could get a full picture. And we did see that properties were rising between 1 to 1.5% a month during that time. Thank you. Would you like to put up the other one, please, Kim, for Salem? So Salem was similar in the sense that they went up 37% over a 5-year period, with their single families going up 47%, and condos 50%, somewhat similar to Manchester. The 2 families and were up a little bit less, but in the vicinity of the average. Vacant land also was up 40%, similar to Manchester. And the commercial industrials were up a lower amount, also similar to Manchester. And the mixed use around the same as Manchester. You can see with the residential styles, the ranches were very popular in their increase, capes, and raised ranches. There's a big demand for one-level properties, and that was shown in the data. But also the colonials and other properties also rose quite a bit. Okay, maybe you can just slide to the next page. Yeah, and this showed again that for all the groups of properties, we were up approximately 100% for that same time period, and there were 631 sales for all these different groups, and showing a 1 to 1.5% increase per month over that time period. Thank you. So if anyone has any other questions that Richard or myself or our team could answer, we'd be more than willing to take the questions for you.
Alderman Clee.
Thank you, Madam President. I have a question. I remember, perhaps Ms. Kleiner can answer this. I remember when we first started talking back in 2018 about doing our evaluations, and one of the things that we realized at that point was that commercial property didn't rise as fast, so their boat didn't go up the same as residential. And we talked about doing them differently, doing them more of value of business versus value of property. I don't know if we went down that direction, and if we did, would COVID have affected that? And are we actually just looking at physical property value of manufacturing and business?
Madam Chair, so I'm going to ask Mr. Torella, who has a wealth of experience, to discuss that. But as a side note, I would say there's nothing that COVID hasn't affected.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
But Mike, would you?
Sure, I can talk about that for a moment. Yes, COVID has had a negative effect on certain types of properties, maybe a little bit more than other types of properties. And it's had a strange effect because actually before COVID occurred, the residential market was starting to level off. But then what happened was with the COVID, people were still in demand to buy a home, but the supply came off the market unexpectedly because people didn't want people in their homes and they were concerned about their safety, which kind of drew up the market higher than what was predicted to happen. And on the opposite effect, with the commercials, obviously having to shut down restaurants and retail and people staying at home and working from home instead of going to the offices, no travel, to theaters and so forth. Many types of properties, commercial-wise, really were devastated during it. A lot of restaurants haven't recovered. And even now, we're slowly starting to see progress, but it's really in specialized areas that have done very well, actually, more of the industrial-type properties with the new demand for warehouse space and manufacturing space. That area is doing stronger than the commercial properties are. So there are still types of commercial properties that are doing well. The apartments are still doing really well. So it's a mixed bag with the commercials. It's not that all of them were, affected negatively for it. Some were affected positively. But when you value the commercials, it really is more of a specialized process of looking at their income stream for leasing, their expenses, and what the capitalization or cost of money is in determining the values of these properties. And they're really class-based, like office, retail, restaurant, manufacturing, warehouse. And each one of those classes will be going in order of value, some higher, some level, some maybe even declining from 5 years ago. So it's a little bit different than with the residentials, where you could see most of the classes of homes were up or down, or up a lot, but the difference was 5 to 7%. When we analyze the commercials, you're gonna see that each category might have quite a difference in their valuations.
May I follow up?
Yes.
Thank you. Having heard what was said about COVID having an effect, and we know that it's affected everything, and you say that it's even affected residential because of supply and demand. You know, there's whispers, there's yelling, there's all kinds of things that saying there'll be a market correction, or things are gonna kind of turn around in a year, hopefully, so does COVID, but the bottom line is we're doing this evaluation where residential is high. Do we foresee anything happening? And I know that we had a big, huge market correction back in the 70s and the 80s and in the 90s. We seem to kind of see these trends. Do you foresee, and I know you don't have a crystal ball, so please, I'm not holding your feet to the fire on this, but do you foresee a correction happening not long after we do this reeval?
Well, the pattern so far is still increases. So in the New Hampshire area and in the Massachusetts area, where I do a lot of evaluation, one thing I've noticed is 4 or 5 years ago, the greater Boston area was really increasing at a high rate. Now they're increasing at a little bit lesser rate, like maybe 5-6% a year instead of the 10 or 12. I think because prices have gotten so high in that market area. But what's happened is the areas to the west and north of Boston and to the south have started to get those increases from a few years ago because their values were lower. They were more desirable for someone that could get more home, even though they had to go further away from maybe where their jobs were and so forth. And what's happened is, when I did the reval in Manchester 5 years ago, they were only going up maybe 5-8% over a 5-year period. And then over the last 5 years, they've gone up 45%, 40%. I think that it's difficult for that increase to occur because it's not as if people are making that kind of salary increases on a yearly basis. I think what's helped a lot is that the capital for getting loans and so forth, interest rates have been extremely low. If those stay low, they will continue to help fuel increases because money is cheap to borrow. But if those start to go up and the cap rates and the interest rates start to go up, that could definitely slow the trend of people purchasing properties, because most people borrow a large amount of it when they buy the property. They don't put a lot down for cash. So I would foresee that I still think things are going to probably increase over the next year or so, but it appears that it could be at a slower rate. Declining wise, I would say that that still may be a couple of years. But again, I do not have a crystal ball. But in Massachusetts, we're valuing now for 2020 values, January 1, 2021, and we're looking at sales in 21 for next year for them, and they're still going up 5 to 10, 12%, depending on the locations. And I see that now with continued sales from the reval that we just finished in Salem and Manchester, that they're still going up 1 to 1.5% a month.
Thank you.
Alderman Lou, and then Alderman Dow.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. For clarity, Alderman Klee asked about the likelihood of a change after this measure and list, but am I right in thinking that every year the equalization step addresses addresses fluctuations in values, so that at equalization that gives us a chance to modify? Okay. Is that correct? So that is one tempering, that is one way to protect us against, you know, a decrease.
Right,
correct?
well, the annual equalization study tells us what our assessment ratio is to market values. So we watch that every year, and that tells us where we are. If we get too far out of range from market values, then we need to do another revaluation. In New Hampshire, we're mandated by state constitution and state statute to revalue at least once every 5 years. So in that 5-year period, we're watching the market. That's why we do that annual ratio report, the equalization study. And again, if we get too far out of whack, then we do another revaluation within that 5-year time frame. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and just to follow up, so the equalization ratio that we are given will allow us to be taxed less if our values have gone down, is that correct?
Well, no,
No?
the municipality still has to raise this, whatever the funds are that they need. So if the ratio goes down, it doesn't mean that you're taxed less. What can happen is the individual burden on the total taxes can shift from property to property or class of property to class of property. But it doesn't mean that your taxes will go up or down in total.
Thank you, I guess I just misunderstood that. Could I ask one last question?
Yes.
When you were looking at your September, when you were going through your September report, you said that it included all valid sales, and I just wondered, did you mean that it was based on, what's the word, verified sales?
No, matter of fact, I'll correct myself on that,
Okay.
thank you. So we did not have all the sales validated, so I did not include the known invalid sales. So it might be a name change, a property put into a trust. I did not include those, but we haven't had the opportunity to qualify every sale, validate every sale. So it did include some sales that may not be truly valid qualified sales.
Okay, and is Vision now doing the sales verification data, sales data verification?
The assessing department is qualifying the sales. We do the initial qualification. Vision will go out and do a field review of the sold properties, and then they do the sales analysis. As Mike had mentioned, that's one of the phases in the total process. They will do the sales analysis to determine what the 2022 assessed values will be.
Okay. So in the 2 months since you did that report, have we been able to verify those sales?
We're still working on the sales validation.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Alderman Dowd.
Yes, we've been reading that the people in Manchester are really concerned about their increase in values. It looks from your data as though the impact in Manchester would be greater than it is in Nashua for the difference in assessed value versus sale value. So can you just address that for a couple minutes? Is Manchester worse off, I guess, if you want to go that way, for values of the sales versus the assessed value of the books?
Want me to take that, Richard?
Yes, please.
Well, it's, again, Richard's data is really not most of the sales that we're going to use when we do the valuation. They actually haven't really occurred yet, because some of them have, but the majority of them are going to happen over the next 6 to 9 months. So we're really not sure what will happen then. It could be that properties do level off somewhat, or they go up further. So it's hard to say what the comparison is to Manchester with Nashua until all the data is in and verified, and then we can look at the data physically and then do our analysis, like we did in Salem and Manchester. But because they're only a year off, and it did appear that over the summer, values were still going up, that I would think that Nashua will probably have a similar increase as a whole to what we see in Salem and Manchester. To the degree of the variance from class to class, it's too early to tell right now.
All set? Alderman Lopez.
Yeah, with regards to class, I guess, I'm a little bit concerned about the possibility of tax burden being shifted from commercial to residential in a scenario where residential is hot and turning over and property values are going up, where commercial maybe not so much, their income's been dropping, and I'm not sure how that all is gonna work out exactly. But in the interest of protecting the balance of burden and ensuring that the city's expenses don't suddenly tip on top of all the residences versus the commercial, or is there any kind of legislative steps you'd recommend that we take, or any strategies if my concerns are valid?
Director Kleiner, did you want to take that one?
So I did for a moment here, and then I'll certainly pass it to the chief assessor, but we understand, so there's been a lot on the news about Manchester and about Manchester's evaluation. And certainly, people are heightened, but we want to caution you, and I think that that's a very important sentence in the chief's report that he issued on September 3rd, is it's just too early to tell. So when we started the revaluation, we said it was going to be a 2-year process because Nashua has over 28,000 properties to look at. We need to let Vision and the assessing office do their work. I think there's a lot more conversation. I think that the fact that Vision issues these bi-weekly reports, the fact that they come and they speak quarterly to the Board of Assessors, the fact that we can come and speak here and keep you well informed. And certainly people can always book an appointment to talk to the chief to the extent he's available. We want to keep people informed, but we also want to make sure that we're keeping people informed with good information. And we really need to allow the experts the time to dive into these sales that haven't even occurred yet.
We need to be sure that our values are fair and equitable. So if there's more of an increase to one class of property than the other based on the sales that we see, we need to reflect that change. Unfortunately, some people will be affected more than others, but we need to keep that fairness and that equity between all of the different classes of property, the types of property, individual properties. If we don't, that'll be shown clearly in the different studies that are done, the ratio studies, the equalization reports. It will show up, and we'll be right back at this again well within the 5 years. It's really important to be fair and equitable with all properties. Do you have anything to add, Mike?
Well, yes, just a little bit. I do think that what we try to do is, although the valuations are 4-1, we have the time to look at sales a month or two after that, because that's a good indicator of the value, maybe more so than sales that would have occurred in the year before, because we do start pretty much 4/1/20, and then or 21, and then we go all the way to 4/1/22, but we also try to look at sales in May of 22 and June and July. As you can see in that study, it was about a 15-month period, so that we could make sure that we balance and see right up to the point that we can what the market is, just in case, things maybe be leveling off, or if they are going up more, so that we're reflective, because the state will look at values from October to October. So if we're not as accurate as possible, by the time they do their study, if things are going up rapidly, we could be, instead of at 100%, we could be at 95 or 94, right when you're starting to get your first equalization. So our goal is to really try to encompass that time period around 4/1, before it and after, to make sure that we're accurate for all the different classes. And we have the market support to show that, so that when the equalization comes out in the fall, our valuations from the spring are somewhat reflective, or closely reflective of that equalization study. That gives you a good starting point for any change that occurs. A lot of communities, as Richard said, they do it within the 5 years, but some do them within 2 or 3. They're allowed to. Towns like Portsmouth and Seabrook and other communities, Bedford, they have been doing them possibly in the 3rd year, because their increases or their changes were dramatic. So if there was a dramatic change up or down, a smaller, quicker interim analysis can be done and allowed by the state to further adjust things if you need. So you don't have to be locked into these values for that time period, where certain towns and cities take advantage of that and then address something before the 5-year occur, so you don't see a dramatic increase like some of the cities and towns. Just a little bit of information for you.
Alderman Lopez?
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding. Director Kleiner is basically saying the study is still ongoing, like the cake's not done, so don't mess with it. And if, for example, we looked at a population and said, okay, we're concerned about the burden is shifting over to seniors or elderly population, and we try to do something to manage that while the study's going, it could skew the results. And then if I understand the revaluation, and if I understand the third comment, it's also, we're not trapped with this valuation. It's likely to be an ongoing process. So if we do start to see a sudden and abrupt shift, then that would trigger another evaluation on a smaller scale that would be correct. Am I getting close?
Yeah, I'd say you're close.
Good for me, that's all I want.
Oh, one thing I can add, in the equalization reports that we get from the state, that we do, we look at the different classes of property. We can even look at different neighborhoods. I've done that myself. You look at different neighborhoods, different types of properties, like comparing Cape-style homes to ranch-style homes. So we're looking at residential properties, commercial properties. We're breaking it down into neighborhoods to see if there's a large shift in one specific type of property compared to the others. And I've seen that in the past where lakefront properties were going up tremendously while all the surrounding properties, non-lakefront properties, were not increasing. So there may be an instance where we need to adjust that one type of property, be it lakefront property, or you have properties that decline rapidly. We've had in the past certain condo complexes that became undesirable for one reason or another, and they dropped rapidly. So you have to keep, again, the fairness and the equity and the proportionality, which I didn't mention, between all these different types of property. So if we see overall that the equalization ratio is 90%, we have one class of property or one neighborhood or whatever it is at a much different rate, then we would need to adjust that one type of property basically immediately to bring it proportional with all the other types of property in the community. So that may be done in between revaluations. Every other class of property may be fine in that 5-year period between revaluations, but we have to adjust that one class of property because something affected that in an atypical fashion.
Yes, that's true, and we've assisted communities in doing like a partial assessment, evaluating all of the data and finding that there are spotted areas, and they've just corrected those areas, so for the next equalization, everything was pretty much equitable and on par with the ratios.
Alderman Cleve?
Thank you. I guess I just want to kind of reiterate something that Alderman Lopez had said when he talked about the conversation about exemptions and so on. And I know we've had a lot of people that have stood up and said that we need to look at the elderly exemption, and that's an exemption of value, just for the public to understand that it's not a credit. Unlike the veterans who get a credit, it's X amount of dollars off their taxes. Exemptions are X amount of dollars off the value of their property. And just like the last time when we had the increase, we changed the exemption to exempt more value and thereby bringing down their tax burden. But we have to remember that when we do this, there are criteria. So there is a means test of what they have for income and what they have for property and so on. But when we do this, we push the burden onto another body or group of people. And if we did this too soon, before we really know what the values are, we may have to do it again, or we may have to bring it back down, and we tend not to do that. Once you exempt value, you tend not to bring that back down, even if, so that was kind of the point that I was trying to make about could this go down. If we jump the gun and try doing these elderly exemptions, we don't know what the property values are going to change. I think we really should wait for the disabled, the blind, the elderly exemptions. We should be waiting until we actually know what the values are. And I understand people say, you know, get ahead of it, but getting ahead of it could hurt another group of people. So that's why I did want to reiterate kind of what something that Alderman Lopez had touched on. And that is my fear if we go too fast.
I was kind of flailing, so I touched on a lot of things.
You're correct in your statement, and we will look at the exemptions, the exemption amounts, but it'll be more toward the end of the revaluation project when we have a better idea of where values will be.
Thank you.
Alderman Little?
Could you, when I went into the assessing office at one point, I spoke with someone about commercial valuation. And this was since I started my term, so it was within the last 2 years. And I was told that the way they're valued is identical to the way residential is valued. Now, it sounds like something that Alderman Clee may have mentioned, that we had considered changing it and going on an income approach. But so I'm not clear at this point, are we using an income approach for anything? So residential is on I don't know, a rebuild, one of those other approaches.
Sales approach, or if it's brand new with the cost.
Right. Do any of the categories get valued using an income approach?
Yes, many of the categories do. Majority of them that get used for the income approach are the apartments, mixed-use properties if they're large enough, smaller ones with just a little bit like an office or something in the house is more of a sales oriented, but if it's apartments with retail space or office, that's considered the income approach. Industrial properties and office, retail, and other types of commercial properties are all looked at based on the income approach, also the cost and sales. But I would say the stronger approach for those properties is the income approach, and the stronger approach for the residential properties is the sales.
Okay, thank you. I may have misunderstood.
I want to add that the income approach looks at the income that the property generates, not the business.
Correct.
So if you're
The landlord.
looking at a shopping center where you don't care if GameStop is in there, how much they're generating, you want to know what the property itself will generate for rent.
Correct.
For
The owner,
each
the
store.
owner, the lease income.
Right.
Thank you. Could I just ask two more questions?
Yes.
Thank you. Has Vision found many errors in the measuring list?
Well, I'm not sure how you define it as an
Many.
error. I guess actually probably June, you probably have to speak on this one a little bit more than me, because you're the one that's managing the team on a sense of the correction of the cards and so forth. It's kind of hard to say what's identified as an error, because there may be changes that occurred and maybe there wasn't a permit taken out and now they're different. Do you want to add a little bit to that, Jim?
Can you identify
I would just
yourself
agree.
first for the transcriptionist, please? Identify yourself.
Oh, June Perry with Vision Government Solutions.
Thank you.
And I would just add that you're right. You know, you can't really define it as an error until you are out there and you're looking at it, you know, whether or not we come across something and it was a siding change, aluminum to vinyl. You know, that could have been done through a building permit, or, you know, they didn't take out a building permit and we're just finding it and we're making a correction. So, you know, as we get more towards the field review, and what the guys are doing now is they're measuring on the outside. I'm not seeing a high error ratio that I know about. But, you know, again, we're gonna be doing the interiors, and that's actually when we pick up a lot more data. Because we find things and people, you know, when we're doing the inside, if there's been a change or a remodel, you know, again, it's not necessarily an error, but it's information that we're finding out about.
Thank you. So I guess the question I asked wasn't very measurable. So let me, if I could, what number errors would you consider high? Just so I know what you're saying isn't a high rate. Would you say 30% you'd call high?
It's hard to do a measurement of percentages. I would say if the measure of the house is off by numerous feet, that would be a good error, you know? But percentage-wise, we don't really look at it as a rating system. We're really there just to address the property as it is now compared to what it was 2 or 3 years ago. And there are changes that occur for many reasons, and it's hard for us to really identify a rating system for errors. We're really there just to get the data correct as it is now, and then get accurate values.
So just to clarify, I had asked whether you found many errors with the measure in the list, and Ms. Perry said, well, I don't know what you would call a lot, and but I don't think there are a lot. And I was just for the purpose of getting a useful answer, I was just trying to say, maybe you can tell me what percent of inspections that would be considered a high number to find an error in. But it sounds as though, are you hesitant to just close that loop for me?
I don't have that answer for you.
Okay, all right, that's fine. All right. And will we be able to let people with escrow accounts, to give them any information to, you know, in advance so that they will be able to prepare for what may be happening in 2022? This may be to the mayor or to Mr. Vincent or...
Director Kleiner?
So perhaps either June or Mike could go over the final document that laid out the rest of the process. I don't think that we have shown that yet. Would that be acceptable? Kind of walk through when those dates are coming up. I think that is to Alderman Liu's question as to when, you know, values will be released and things of that sort. June or Mike, would you be
That's
willing?
the project timeline.
Yeah, I got it. Let me just pull it up, that's all. Yeah, so just to kind of take it over the beginning of the year, we'll kind of do our preliminary analysis in December, January, and then be a review with those preliminary January through June, and then the assessors review in June and July, and then we'll give them like a preliminary manual and update of the documents that we've done. And then in July, we'll send out the notices. They'll be mailed out early, mid-July, and then we'll do appointments in late July and in August for the hearings. And then the second notice of the change will go out in August. And completion is due September 1st. So I would say that for the assessors to do their numbers and get everything ready for the state, to be doing that in obviously late August. Final guy. Right what I just said is right up there on the screen.
Alderman Clee.
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to make it clear, and I know it was touched on earlier, that the percentage of increase of assessment is not directly related to the percentage of increase in taxes. And that needs to be understood. Truthfully, if every single property went up 100%, we would not see $1 increase in taxes. That's not how it happens. As we could see here, different percentages go up. The same bills have to be paid by the same, and I know when I've gone back and looked at the history of the tax rate, I saw at one point it was up to, the tax rate was like, I think it was like 50-something% in the late 60s, and then in 1970, it dropped down to like 18% because values jumped so high. So the percentage of taxes is not necessarily the rate of the increase of assessment. And the state will determine what that rate is based on our overall city valuation. Am I correct, Ms. Kleiner, in that? And I'm sorry, and
Yes, you are correct. We will get calls tomorrow.
Yes.
That, you know, people are afraid that their taxes are going up 40%. That's not the case. And that's not the conversation. The conversation we're talking about is in assessments. And there's a large difference between assessments and your tax rate. I'll turn it to Chief to do.
Again, you're right. If the overall increase is 40%, doesn't mean people's taxes are going up 40%. Generally, what happens is some property owners' taxes will go down, some will go up, some will stay about the same. The tax rate is quite simply a matter of division. They take the total revenue that has to be raised and divide that by the total assessed value, or I forget which one. One gets divided into the other, the total value for the city and the total amount of revenue that needs to be raised, and that's your tax rate. That's kind of simplifying the process, but that's essentially what it is. And then where an individual property owner's assessed value falls in that increase will determine whether their taxes will go up or down. So if the general the average increase was 40%, and an individual property's value goes up 20%, they'll probably see a decrease in their taxes. If it goes up 60%, they'll probably see an increase in their taxes. So, but that, again, is way too early right now to project.
Thank you for the clarification. I just know exactly what Ms. Kleiner said, Director Kleiner said, there will be calls tomorrow morning, probably to every one of us sitting around this horseshoe. And I just kind of wanted to make sure that that information went out, that this is not directly related, and as you pointed out, too soon to start talking about that. Thank you.
Alderman Clemmons.
Thank you. So based on this timeline here, we're basically looking to have this implemented for December 2022? Is that correct? Okay. And do we think we're gonna make that timeline?
Yes, I am very confident Vision Government Solutions will make that timeline.
Okay, thank you.
You all set, Director Kleiner?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank you all for coming this evening and for explaining this process. It was very informative. Appreciate you also, folks on Zoom. So thank you for the presentation this evening.
Our pleasure.
Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to make a motion that the November 15, 2021 special meeting of the Board of Aldermen be adjourned by roll call.
Motion is to adjourn. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman O'Brien votes yes? Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Allison. I apologize.
That's okay. Alderman O'Brien,
Yes.
Alderman Cleet,
Yes.
Alderman Dowd,
Yes.
Alderman Karen,
Yes.
Alderman Clemmons,
No.
Alderman Lopez,
There's
Also
always
no.
one.
Alderwoman Lou,
Yes.
Alderman Jettie,
Yes.
Alderman Harriet Gathright,
Yes.
and Alderman Wiltshire.
Yes.
All right, you have 8 yeas and 2 nays.
And we are adjourned at 9:24 PM. Thank you, everyone.